Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about Tyron Woodley versus Jake Paul. I think that many people have noted that this fight between Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley was one of the best presented and marketed fights of the year. We've had some big ones. His brother facing Floyd Mayweather. We've had Conor McGregor come back and lose in a devastating fashion to Dustin Poirier. We've seen some amazing stuff this year. But from a marketing perspective and the fighters being able to do interviews with all sorts of people and being available for everybody, that was a big thing when it came to this fight. Like I said, these two fighters, whenever an interview was asked of them, whenever a media obligation was asked of them, they were available for it. And Jake Paul led the charge for everybody on the card. And Tyron Woodley was a perfect foil for him. And in this podcast, I wanted to talk about somewhat of the aftermath of the fight, where we're at after Jake Paul defeated Tyron Woodley by split decision, surprisingly. To many people, they never thought that Tyron Woodley would have even won on any of the judges' scoring cards. It was a big surprise for me, and I think from watching interviews and from watching a lot of or listening to a lot of podcasts, this was a big surprise to a lot of people. But Jake Paul comes out as the winner, as many people predicted. I think most people predicted that Jake Paul would come out with the win. Many people were surprised on the way Tyron Woodley was able to evade getting knocked out. He pressured Jake Paul. He was going after him. He was walking him down. By many people, and myself included, I think we all agree that the main issue why Tyron Woodley lost was with the amount of total strikes landed, by the amount thrown. You can see just by the numbers, it doesn't look like a big percentage, a big amount of, there's not a big difference in the amount of punches thrown. Jake Paul threw about 207 punches and landed 71, while Tyron Woodley threw about 163, but only landed 52. Now, the big power shots, Tyron Woodley was really going after him with that. He threw about 115. He landed 41. Jake Paul threw 85 power shots and landed 35. A lot of the power shots that Jake Paul was throwing was on the back foot as well, as the commentators noted. I think that was a real reason why Tyron Woodley felt comfortable pressuring him and coming forward. But we all know this about Tyron Woodley's whole career in MMA. He's always liked it when people follow him. He likes it when his back is up against the cage. He likes it when people come into his zone, his pocket. And with that, he's able to hit him with his devastating shots. And I think that I wanted to bring this up, and I don't see this with a lot of the podcasts that I'm listening to, with a lot of the videos that I'm watching, is the fact that Tyron Woodley is so accustomed to throwing a lesser amount of shots than the typical welterweight or anybody in his division or any other striker. And he's always used this in his MMA career to go all 5 rounds in the UFC or all 3 rounds in non-title fights. He's used this as a way to make it through all of the rounds. Now, I'm not saying that Tyron Woodley has cardio issues, but we've noticed this in the development of his career, that he slowed down on the amount of shots that he threw. And in MMA, there's a whole other category of things that could happen, where he could be using his wrestling, where he could be using his jiu-jitsu. And all of that stuff takes energy. But there's also pockets of spaces in the fight where he's able to rest, where he's able to take a breath. But in boxing, you saw it here, whenever he would run right at Jake Paul and sometimes even ducked his head down and threw all caution to the wind and tried getting him out with those power shots. You could see that right when he got tied up, which was Jake Paul's plan at that point, because he knew how many rounds he had on top of Tyron Woodley. By knowing that, he wrapped up Tyron Woodley, and that ate up precious seconds off the clock near the end of the fight. So I think that Tyron Woodley's main issue, and I agree with most journalists, most people that are doing podcasts about this fight, is the fact that it's been ingrained into his head that he's so used to throwing less amount of strikes as opposed to the beginning of his career. And this might have just been, this might also have to do with the fact that how decorated of a fighter he is. This guy was on the Mount Rushmore of welterweights in the UFC. And every time he steps into that octagon and now into the boxing ring, that gets questioned. And with that comes pressure. So you have to be a little bit more reserved. You have to be a little bit more cautious when, especially fighting a YouTuber who has kind of shrugged off the YouTuber moniker and became almost a real fighter now. I still don't think that the people that he's fought has made me change my mind on the caliber of fighter that he is. But right when you step into that octagon, as Ariel Helwani says, or a ring or wherever it is, you become a fighter. And if you look at someone like Tommy Fury, who fought at the beginning of the main event, if you look at his career as opposed to Jake Paul's career, Jake Paul's career is a little bit in fast forward if you think about it. He fought a welterweight champion of the world in mixed martial arts, but still a person that has combat sports in his arsenal, in his background. He's done it. He knows how to take a punch. He's come back from adversity. And at the end of the day, he knows what it takes to be a champion. Now, he may be 39 years old, and his main background at the beginning of his career, being an All-American and being a wrestler, learned to throw his hands. But at the end of the day, Tyron Woodley has been training in boxing for a very long time, as opposed to Jake Paul, who picked it up just a couple years ago. And for him to do what he did and stay composed in front of the sold-out crowd in Cleveland, which I don't think is being talked about as much as it should be, because Jake Paul's first amateur fight, and his only, I believe, was in front of a massive crowd. Now, he wasn't the main event, and he wasn't the reason why the crowd was there. So that kind of alleviated the pressure a little bit. I believe he fought under his brother's card when he fought KSI. But his Nate Robinson fight was with minimal crowd. There was just a couple staff members from Triller. His Ben Askren fight, minimal crowd. I think a few fans got tickets from Triller. And then you go from those two fights to this, a sold out crowd in your hometown. I think the main thing is the amount of pressure, the amount of people that are there to watch you do your thing, and you have to deliver. You can see it in some of the footage. He's getting escorted by the police to the stadium in his Rolls Royce. All these people around him, they're there for him. And Woodley almost had him. Jake Paul, I saw a couple of times where Jake Paul landed some really nice shots to Tyron Woodley, obviously not of the caliber of a top boxing athlete, but he was hitting him with shots that dazed and confused Tyron Woodley at some points. But then Tyron Woodley came back and hit him with a shot that almost sent him through the ropes. I think it should have been called a knockdown. He did hold the ropes, and he did. That was the only reason he was standing up. So Jake Paul did come back from that. You could see there was a little bit of dip. I thought there might have been some cardio issues. It might have been just the overall excitement, the adrenaline rush that happens at the beginning of the fight. That might have been dumped off in the middle of the fight. And then later on, he came back. He came back and started antagonizing Tyron Woodley. Started licking his gloves and all this kind of stuff, BJ Penn style. And he came back. He showed a fighter's heart. And Tyron Woodley, unfortunately, he wasn't able to produce the amount of shots that he needed to get Jake Paul out of there. But I still don't agree with the fact that he had him on the ropes and he should have really went after him. That's just a veteran move by Tyron Woodley. If you look at the Nate Diaz fight against Leon Edwards, Nate Diaz had him for broke. He was almost out of there. Leon Edwards was. And Nate Diaz made sure that he took his time, even though that lost him the fight. But you recognize that throwing those wild punches at the end, thinking that your opponent is out of there, could leave you wide open for a straight shot down the pipe and getting knocked out. So overall, I think that for Tyron Woodley's career, it was kind of weird for him to keep calling out for the fight again. And it was just kind of tough to watch, to be honest with you, for him to call upon Jake Paul again after Jake Paul. It's just not a good look when Jake Paul is out there talking about anti-bullying campaigns that he's running and somewhat being the nice guy and having a very emotional moment at the end of the fight with Ariel Helwani. And then for Tyron Woodley to come out and to really, I don't know, he came out of nowhere and was very aggressive and it kind of felt to me that he felt that he was owed a second fight, even though many people thought that he lost the fight. Some people even had it as a draw. I could have seen that in the middle of the fight, but then watching the tail end, I really believe Jake Paul won this one. He won it not by any devastating shots or anything crazy like that. He won it by staying on his bike, popping him with shots, backing up, and not going after Tyron Woodley, not being the person walking their opponent down. He was all about his somewhat counter shots that he was throwing. And that's how Jake Paul won this fight. I think for Jake Paul, I talked about this in the pre-fight podcast that I did. Even if Tommy Fury wins by devastating knockout, which he didn't, unfortunately, I still don't think that Tommy Fury is the right opponent for him, because he might be a step down as opposed to Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley, like I said before many times in this podcast now, welterweight champion, Hall of Famer, Mount Rushmore in the welterweight division. And to go from that to a person on a 7-fight winning streak against fighters that should be fighting at 145 and people with lopsided records in the losing column, might not be the best opponent. Now, I don't know the numbers that are happening in the UK or anywhere else, but Tommy Fury might not be the right opponent for Jake Paul. So we got to wait. We got to see who could be next for Jake. Looks like he's taking some time off. He even tweeted out that he is retired at the moment. So who knows what he's thinking. Don't get your hopes up on any of the UFC fighters being let out of their contract to fight Jake Paul. I think that Jake Paul has to do something devastating for Dana White to be like, okay, we got to get on this, and he's got to stop beating ex-UFC fighters. We got to put him against someone good and someone who can strike. These are all, Ben Askren, he was a good fighter, but he was a wrestler. Tyron Woodley was a good fighter, but he didn't just rely on his striking. He relied on a bunch of stuff. He relied on the threat of the takedown, especially at the beginning of his run to the belt. Someone like, this would never happen, but some of the expert strikers like Anderson Silva, even though he's a little bit older in his age, I saw Israel Adesanya talking about it. These fights would never happen because Jake Paul is a smart businessman and he would never go against these elite strikers in MMA. But that's the type of person Dana White's going to throw at him if the UFC wants to get involved, which I don't think they want to at the moment. Even someone like Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor, they might just be too small for him. Nate Diaz fights at 170, and at 170, he's a little bit too small. He fights at 155. Conor McGregor, 155. He's fought at 170 as well, but he's a little bit too small for that weight class, and especially someone that weighs around like 190 something. It looked like Jake Paul was around 200 pounds when he was in the ring. So he might just be too big for these guys. So it all depends on who Jake Paul wants to fight next. There's no clear-cut fighter out there. Like I said, I don't think Tommy Fury is the one right now. He might just take that one just to stay active. But I feel bad for Tommy Fury. I think he should just go back on his run, stay on the path that he's carved out for himself, and start making a name and getting all these fights. I think it'll be a massive payday for him against Jake Paul, but if he loses, he'll lose that legitimate boxing credential that he has. Unfortunately, even though Jake Paul is doing amazing stuff, if Tommy Fury lost to him, he would lose that credibility and just be the Love Island guy. He'll just be a celebrity. But he said countless number of times that he is not a celebrity fighter. He's a real boxer. So if he wants to keep that, maybe the Jake Paul route is not the right one for him. I think that it was a great fight overall. Great card. Great. I love seeing all the interviews and the press, and just consuming all that content was amazing. It was a great week of fights. There was also UFC. And that was fun to watch as well on Saturday. And then Sunday night fights, I'm really liking them, especially the 8 o'clock start Eastern Standard. Really liking it. So really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you could like, subscribe, hit the bell notification on YouTube, that would be really appreciated. If you could listen to the podcast on the different podcast networks, that'd be amazing as well. Leave a review, 5 stars, all that good stuff. And you can listen to it on any of them. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about this. Write a comment down below. Let's chat. Let's go back and forth about it. Let me know your thoughts on the fight. And let me know who you think is next for Jake Paul and who you think is next for Tyron Woodley, or if he should just retire. So let me know. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.